Hi everyone, welcome back to this lesson 3 in my FluteBox Basics Masterclass series. Really hope you're enjoying the series so far and that you're finding that those bass drum and hi-hat sounds are really coming on. So today we're going to look at one of the hardest of the basic sounds to produce, the k sound. But before we do, let's warm up the face once more. So we can use our fingers around our cheeks just to relax those muscles there. We can use our thumbs around the bottom of our face just to help to relax those muscles all around the jaw. And of course, we want to think about these muscles here, so we can lift up like the rabbit face, and finally we can stretch down here with the fly on the nose. Before we get to our sound today, we're going to take a little look at breathing, because this sound requires lots and lots of energy. So I've got a little breathing exercise for you, which not only is going to really help with the cut sound, but might also help with your flute playing in general. So if we take a second to think about our breathing mechanism, we want to try and always make sure that we're breathing really deeply so we can get that maximum amount of air into our lungs. So a good way to check that we're doing this is to take our hands and place them just at the bottom of our ribs, bottom of our lungs. So emptying out the air first so that you can really check you're getting a full breath in. See if you can take a really nice deep breath, aiming to make those hands move a little bit. So once you're happy that you're breathing nice and deeply, we can start to think about the way that we're using and controlling the air. So a good exercise for this is to take another breath nice and deeply, and then we're going to make a s sound, seeing if we can let that air out really steadily and controlled. So breathing out first, breathing in, and then I find with my teeth together it's a lot easier, we can let out a s sound. Now if you find that your s sound is quite audible, or it's got little kind of bumps along the way, something like that, then a good thing to start to think about is how we're using our support muscles to control that flow of air. And the stronger these support muscles become, the more chance we've got of making our cut sound really, really strong. So we're going to try that exercise one more time, and this time try and imagine that you're only letting out a tiny, tiny amount of air. You might like a visual to help you with this. Something like having a candle in front of your face is a really good visual, because you can aim to not let that candle flame go out with your breath. So try and make that S sound as inaudible as possible so that it's a really slow, steady stream of air, and you should find that these muscles start to kick in to really help you with that. So we're going to breathe out again, breathe in, and we're going to let out that S sound and see if we can control it. So as you can hear there, I was able to make the sound less audible, which means that I'm controlling the sound more. You can challenge yourself with holding on that S sound for as long as you find comfortable, or even to the end of your breath. But a little bit like we talked about in the last lesson, if you do find that you go a little bit dizzy, this is because you're just adjusting to using the air in a different way inside your body. So just take a little rest. So now that we're ready and warmed up to go, let's start to think about the sound we're going to have a go at producing today. So this sound is a mimic of the snare drum. So if we take a look again once more at our drum kit, if we remember the hi-hat that we found from last time, the snare drum is the small drum just below the hi-hat there on its own stand. A little bit difficult to see on this picture. So it's hiding away there at the back. And the snare drum is the drum which really keeps the beat alongside the bass drum in a kit. So you normally have the bass drum on the stronger beats of the bar, and then the snare drum fills in on the other beats of the bar. Now what's unique to the snare drum, and the reason it gets its name, is because it has snares underneath which can be turned on and off via a lever. Now these snares are like little balls, metal balls, which when activated rattle against the drum itself, making that really nice sizzling sound. And it's this sizzling sound that we're going to try and replicate with our beatbox sound. The k sound needs to be produced with a closed throat. So if you think about the throat positions, which we've discussed before, we want to be aiming to have a high larynx with the throat closed. The sound is very much going to be at the front of the mouth, rather like the hi-hat sound that we looked at last time. So the way to get started with the k sound is to think of a word with a really explosive k at the beginning. So something like curve is a really good word to use, or if you're feeling hungry, curry is a really good word as well. So just have a try at seeing if you can really make those words explosive as you say them. So curve or curry. In order to start to make this a bit more explosive, we can think about the position of our cheeks as we do the k. So if we lift up our cheeks before we say the k, we start to get a little bit more explosion to that sound. Another thing we can think about is the tongue. So you want to aim to keep your tongue really far forward and to make sure it's doing a nice flick down on that k. So high cheeks and a real good flick from the tongue. Now that we've got the mouth positions working, we can start to add some more power to that sound. And this is where the breathing exercise that we did earlier comes in. So if we remember our deep breathing, taking a really nice breath and then thinking about those muscles that started to activate in our support mechanism when we did the s exercise. So see if you can just take a second to think about those muscles. When you're ready, we're going to take a nice deep breath. Cheeks lifted in position, we're thinking about our tongue, and we're going to see if we can explode that k. Just like with the other sounds which we've explored so far, you might want to experiment playing around with the position of your mouth to see what works best for you. Before we move on to having a go at this sound with a track, let's just take a second to take a look at a beatbox score. So here's our score which we saw in lesson 1. We've already talked about the bass drum sound represented with the B, the hi-hat sound with the TS there, and now we've got our K, which represents the sound of our sizzling snare drum. So now it's time to try out our snare drum sound with a track, and I've got a bit more of a laid back track for us to try today. So let's try putting our snare sound on beats 2 and 4, which is the traditional position for that snare drum to take. See if you can have a go at breathing in on the other beats like we did with our hi-hat sounds. 1, 2, 3, 4. So now let's move on to having a go with our flute. Now the k sound with a flute is really difficult to produce. Luckily for us, as we've discovered, the k sound tends to take place on the off beats or back beats. So most of the time you'll probably use the aeolian sound with your k, which is great because we don't have to use quite so much air and we don't have to make sure we get straight into that flute embouchure. But let's just explore moving from the k to the flute embouchure before we have a go even with our flute. So a good way to practice this is to use your finger to represent your flute under your lips there, and if you imagine doing your k with that high cheek position, and then try and bring your lips down at the top so that you're more into a flute position, and imagine that you're blowing into your flute. Now as you can see, this is quite a big movement, so that's right, it's a good idea to try it out without your flute beforehand so that you can really imagine how far you've got to move. So now let's try making an Aeolian sound with our flute. So we're going to use an A, and we can have our hand on the barrel like we've done before to keep our flute nice and steady. So even though we're not going to be producing that full sound, it's a good idea to think about that little bit of movement which we've discovered from the high cheeks into the flute, because it's going to mean that the sound itself is stronger. So we bring our flute up, we're fingering the A, and here's our K. Once you get more comfortable with this, you should find that you don't have to move as far to make that strong sound. Okay, so now we're going to try it with the track. So on beat 2, we're going to have our K and our Aeolian sound. And on beat 4, we're just going to create a full flute sound so that we can really get used to moving from the K sound to the full flute embouchure. 1, 2, 3, 4. Before we move on to the full flute sound with the K, let's have a go at moving between the K and the full flute sounds a little bit faster. So on beats 1 and 3, we'll have the full flute sounds, and on 2 and 4, let's see if we can put that K in there as well. One, 2, 3, 4. Don't worry if you didn't manage all of those, definitely something worth practicing. So now let's have a try at producing a full flute sound alongside our K. Now, as we've been saying, this is really tricky. If we think about it, we've got an open mouth for the K sound, and we're also trying to use a closed throat, which is the exact opposite of all the things that we really want to do to produce a full flute embouchure. So you might have to really play around with this. The other thing that's worth saying is that sometimes I think it's worth sacrificing a good flute tone to produce a good K, or sacrificing a little bit of the K to produce a good flute tone. So it depends on what you're trying to produce. So if we have our flute on our A again, we're going to think about our breathing, our support, the movement that we need from the lips, from the K to the full flute embouchure, and we're going to have to think about the air speed and the connection as well. So something like this. Okay, so now let's try that with the track. So we're just going to use beats 2 and 4 now. We're going to have a go at trying to produce a full sound in one bar and an Aeolian sound in the next bar. So K full flute sound and K Aeolian sound in the bars alternating. Don't worry if you don't get all of these. It's definitely something that takes a lot of practice, and it's also really tiring. So you might find that you want to take some breaks. So we'll start with the full flute tone. 1, 2, 3, 4. So I think you've earned a well-earned break there. So I'm going to show you what can be done with that K sound alone with another etude from Tilman Denhart's book, Flute Beatboxing. This is the gold etude with the K sound. There's lots of movement there between the low register and the middle register, but I like how that study does it in blocks, so you've got a real chance to have a go at trying to make the best flute tone you can, moving from one register to the other. I also like the way there's lots of chances to have breaths in rest, and the rhythm of the melody also allows for this. So great study there, I highly recommend it. Before we leave our k sound for today, we're also going to have a go at the inhaled sounds. So like the hi-hat sound, it's possible to inhale on the k sound. So the production is the same in the mouth, we're just going to take that inhale. So exhale, k, and inhale. Again, like the hi-hat, I think this is quite difficult at first, so combining the inhaled sounds with your exhaled sound might mean that you can create a stronger sound on the inhale, although I don't think the inhaled sound is ever going to be as strong as the k. So exhale, inhale. I still find it a lot easier to create a stronger sound on the inhale when it's combined like that with the exhaled sound rather than it on its own, although of course in reality it's often used more on its own so that we can get that breath in before we play another beatbox sound or full flute tone. So let's try that with our track. So we're going to try a combination of things this time. Let's try a full flute tone on beat 1, we'll try an exhaled k aeolian sound on beat 2, we'll then return to our full flute tone on beat 3, and then on beat 4 we'll see if we can try that inhaled sound. Now don't worry if you muddle these up or lose your way, it really doesn't matter, you will get there in the end with practice. 1, 2, 3, 4. Great, so well done at trying those different sounds together. Lesson 4 will be our last lesson, and we're going to try and put everything we've learnt together and try out a little excerpt for one of my solo beatbox arrangements. If you do have any questions from this lesson or anything that we've looked at previously, then feel free to leave them in the comment section below and I'll try and answer them for you. And I look forward to seeing you again in lesson 4.